tardes. Estoy muy emocionada de estar aquí. Muchas gracias a Sustainable Brands y Urban. My name is Rochelle, and I'm an analyst at Sustainability, which is a think tank and consulting firm based on seizing opportunities to evolve business in service of greater sustainability. The presentation I'm going to give to you today is based on recent research we've done, published in June, on a report with which I'm a co-author, of which we interviewed over 16 innovation experts, as well as showcased 4 multinationals who've successfully implemented a business model innovation for sustainability. I'm really excited to be here because I think this kind of venue is just what we need, a place where we can learn certain skills and tactics, and then learn how to describe them and communicate them to those that don't know them yet. Like Koan was telling me, a perfect blend of right and left brain. So, without further ado, I will start with a very important question. What is a business model? There's been a lot of discussion today about business models, kind of this special, mystical concept. But the simplest definition I could find was the way in which a company makes its money. However, if you ask innovation experts Osterwalder and Pignot, we saw Osterwalder talking about Skype yesterday, they consider a business model as the fundamental structures for how companies create, deliver, and capture value. However, many existing business models are predicated on the fact that vital non-financial resources such as natural capital, social capital, and human capital are in virtually unlimited supply, and we know that that's no longer true. This is why we need business model innovation to meet our needs within the limits of our planetary boundaries. Sustainability describes business model innovation as involving a novel form of exchange at some point along the value chain. The most common form of exchange is often between customers and companies. For example, Sun Edison provides the value of solar energy to its customers by leasing them through power purchase agreements, so they don't have to buy the panels up front. Then customers can repay the loans through the energy provided through the solar powered panels. Or this can happen in the supply chain. SAB Miller sources from cassava farmers to create a new beer product, therefore creating new value in the exchange of its supply chain. Or this can happen in a whole industry level. Starbucks co-created a green building certification that can be used by any retailer to reduce its global carbon footprint. Our first wave of research sought to describe this landscape, and we found 20 business model innovations for sustainability and looked into what those meant and what companies were applying them. However, what we found was that most of these business model innovations are happening only in small, or mostly in small to medium enterprises, and very rarely happening in global Fortune 500 firms. This inspired our second wave of research, which is based on how can a large company create an enabling environment to create a business model shift. I'm going to share with you some of the highlights of our research. We found that there are 3 factors influencing business model shifts. The first is external conditions, those both putting pressure on the company as well as providing opportunities for momentum. In addition, going further, you look at the internal culture of a firm, the innovation capacity of that company, and the actions of the individual innovator. And I'm very excited to talk about that today because I'm standing in front of what is probably many individual innovators today. First, external conditions. If you ask any risk manager or foresight strategist that looks 5, 10, 20 years into the future, they can tell you often that business models that are financially successful today are at risk in the future. Climate change, rising scarcity of supply, inequality, volatility in commodity markets are all putting pressures on business and leading to a call for longer-term perspectives. Demand for energy, for example, is set to rise 56% from what it was in 2010 to 2040. Climate change affects all aspects of the value chain. Water scarcity is already a demanding issue on many global businesses. And in terms of climate change, some industries will feel this earlier than others and send a ripple effect amongst the economy. For example, last year, Ceres put out the Climate Insurer Risk Report that talked about how corporate insurance premiums are significantly increasing or disappearing altogether. In fact, weather-related global losses have increased tenfold in the last 4 decades. Meanwhile, the proportion of those losses that are insured has steadily decreased. Accelerating urbanization is also what's happening in the world today. Farmers are leaving their lands and moving to cities for better opportunities. Some of the other speakers talked about companies like Nestlé, Mondelez International, Mars Inc., and including Syngenta, that are losing their supply and security of supply due to accelerating urbanization. It's no surprise that many of these companies have adopted inclusive sourcing models where they invest in their smallholder farmers to secure their livelihoods as well as secure supply for the companies. These are external conditions pressuring businesses and showing that these short-term perspectives no longer work. In April of this year, Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, the largest asset manager in the world, wrote a letter to the S&P 500 CEOs asking them to stop meeting financial short-term goals at the expense of undermining long-term value. When the world's largest asset manager tells you to start thinking longer term, that is a signal of what lies on the horizon. There are external constraints, but there are also areas of momentum that can provide amazing opportunities for those that are willing to take the first move. You may be familiar with things like the circular economy or the collaborative economy, and also that are enabled by things like digitization, providing a new transparency for customers to know more and demand more from companies. Digitization is also increasingly making it easier for entrants into the market. One of my favorite startups is a Nigerian startup called Andela that addresses the shortage of software engineers as well as the shortage of quality livelihoods in the region. It adopts a pay-to-learn model, essentially, where students take on IT skills and real-world projects that are work on projects by multinationals that need that skill gap. Such current clients include Microsoft and Segovia. And accelerating urbanization has its downfalls, but cities are very special places. I myself am from New York, and I can't describe how much specialness that city has. MIT researcher Wai Pan even has created a metric called the social tie density, which essentially measures the density of a city. The more dense a city, the more innovation capacity it is possible of. You can see this happening with South Korea, that has a government initiative to enable a sharing economy and collaborative economy. And in Melbourne, Australia, where IBM has hooked up with the largest water and sanitation utility to use cloud computing, analytics, big data to reduce water management costs by 15%. And also reiterated in the conference these last couple of days has been this element of a rising consciousness, an inflection point in how we see ourselves as individuals and that of a collective entity. There are pioneering leaders doing this, such as Howard Schultz at Starbucks and Paul Mullen at Unilever. But more and more, this idea is spreading across the world and into the largest businesses. External conditions play a role with what's happening, but the culture inside companies, as you've heard, is so important. In our research, we found a pattern amongst innovative companies. Although not conclusive, you can still have a very innovative company without all these things, we found that they were quite common. That includes supportive leadership, either from senior management or CEO, if only to set innovation as a priority on the agenda, as well as an aspect of organizational design. Deflating hierarchies so employees feel more empowered to speak up and share creative ideas, as well as co-collaborate and communicate better. Another element is risk-taking and a comfort with failure. Although not that unusual for its industry, Google has a failure rate of 36%. So, just knowing that not everything is going to work can allow space for tinkering, experimentation, and innovation. And finally, collaboration is extremely important, both within company walls and across divisions, as well as externally with other companies, customers, perhaps even bringing on entrepreneurs and residents to spearhead new ideas and thinking. But what if you don't work for an innovative company? I bet most of us don't, actually. So what can you do as an individual within a company to catalyze thinking on different ways and about business model shifts? Many of you are probably working on or in charge of innovation and sustainability at organizations, and you're probably familiar with mining your network, figuring out who to talk to who to get your ideas across and also achieve buy-in. You're likely familiar with building the business case, especially if you work in sustainability. How do you make sure that your idea can compete financially with many other ideas present in the company pipeline? And if you're a manager, you're likely familiar with aligning innovation metrics to make sure that the way employees are evaluated is aligned with how you want to encourage innovation and sustainability. But two things I'll touch on today that you probably are not as familiar with is mapping the business model and focusing on value. Studies show that 60 to 85% of employees don't understand their company's strategy, including its business model. Simply educating employees on how the company generates its revenue can start a lot of discussion about innovating its business model. Perhaps you just need to draw it out. Here you can see a simple value chain map of a generic retail bank, showing how the bank exchanges value between its investments, customers, through certain products and services. This adds a level of transparency to revenue generation and is especially important for large companies that have acquired quite a bit and honestly don't exactly know how much they have, what is working with which, and what revenue they're really generating from what. And looking at that, too, you can start to see where maybe you're missing certain value opportunities. And it's important to focus on that value. Applying a more holistic lens to a company's model helps to not only generate more revenue and sell more stuff, but create more value to your customers and your stakeholders. This is another tool, and I'm running a workshop later today at 2 where we'll use some of these tools and have more application. And this was coined by a Cambridge researcher, Nancy Bakken. And around the perimeter here, you can see it is segmented by stakeholders, customers, investors, employees, etc., and what is important to them. And in the middle, you can see the purpose of the company. Why does it exist? Around there, you see the current value proposition, the value captured, and then around that, you see the value destroyed, something that most companies don't focus on. And around that, you see the value that's just being completely missed and could be new markets, new products, etc. And around that, you see the opportunities. So looking at this amongst the way stakeholders gain value from your offerings as a company can really illustrate where there's opportunity to innovate and to change. So this may be a bit abstract, but business model shifts are happening, and companies are using these tools to create successful business model innovations. Fibria is a pulp and paper company in Brazil. Faced with the impacts of climate change and increasing competition from overseas, is now diversifying its portfolio from pulp and paper into solar energy generation, biofuel production, and even becoming a sustainable land developer. Novelis is the world's largest rolled aluminum company that almost went bankrupt when it didn't hedge properly against raw material prices in the markets. They decided to just get rid of that vulnerability altogether and instead source scrap material and increase the recycling percentage from 33% to 80%, moving towards a closed-loop model. And Syngenta faced with losing main customers from moving to cities for better opportunities, needed to rework its model as well. It decided to adopt a barter model, where instead of making farmers pay up front for all the products they need, they would pay at the end of the season, after the yields had come in, thereby giving farmers better financial stability and securing a customer base for Syngenta. And finally, Starbucks, faced with competition from above from artisanal coffee makers and competition below from fast food joints, needed a way to differentiate in the market, as well as retain key talent, especially designers and architects that it was losing steadily. It did this through green building and co-created a global retail standard with the United States Green Building Council and other retailers like Kohl's and Target that can be used around the world to reduce carbon footprints of retailers. So, as I mentioned, there are external conditions that are going to influence business model shifts and make them important as well as essential and helpful. But that depends if companies are willing to accept those external forces and leverage them to their advantage. And when it comes down to it, it is about individual innovators that can harness the passion and their need to create a better world into practical application through tools and tactics to catalyze different thinking in their companies. What might the future hold? Perhaps pharmaceutical companies help with prevention of disease alongside treatment. Perhaps consumer goods companies base their profitability on better nutritional outcomes. Perhaps media companies amuse as well as entertain and instill beneficial and positive values in the culture. Perhaps it's oil and gas companies that take the leap into renewable energy and kickstart our way into a clean energy future. And perhaps it's agricultural companies that remain profitable based on their investments in their value chain and in the ecosystems upon which they depend. In our next wave of research, we look forward to understanding how whole industries can innovate their models to become more sustainable and to create a more sustainable world for all of us. I look forward to engaging in discussion with all of you about this later today, during the workshop, and into the future. And thank you so much for listening today.